Hello, hello. What is up? You are listening to The Long Game. This is David Lee Kim. Today we have a kitchen side episode and it's more of a random show. We talk about things like what to do when you're lacking inspiration. Alex went through a nihilistic funk for a little bit, and we talk about things that you're doing that aren't inspiring you, that maybe you should just cut out. But there are also situations where it's important to grind through it despite not having motivation. We also talk in depth about the helpful content update that Google recently released and what we're seeing across our clients. Ultimately, there's a lot of noise here, and it's important to know what exactly you're focused on. We also ended up talking about the changes in work culture since when we first started our profession and how the talent market's shifting a little bit. So there's a lot that we go over today. This was really one of the more behind the scenes conversations that we want to share with you all. So hope this is helpful, and we'll see you on the other side. I did want to talk about the helpful content update because a lot of people are like, oh no, our traffic's going down. And I look at it, I'm like, you shouldn't have been ranking for these keywords in the first place. And I'm like, well, leads are up and they're flat. Like leads are still good relative to like traffic, which is very down. So you're actually good. Like, do you care about traffic or you want leads? And they're like, oh, okay.
I don't want leads.
That has been an interesting pattern, right? Because the clients that I'm working with, the clients that you're working with, the ones who have dropped, it's like we obviously are measuring leads and conversions too, and that hasn't dropped. So I'm like, that's pretty interesting, you know?
But imagine SEO agencies that only look at traffic and they're freaking the fuck out. And they're like, oh, we got to optimize for these keywords and all that shit. And it's like, no, you're not looking at the right thing.
I mean, to be fair, in some cases that could be an issue, but I'm not one of those guys who follows like every single algo update and like is constantly reading, search engine roundtable or whatever. But I try to follow Lily Ray and a couple interesting SEO voices for this stuff. And she's been talking about how this is really like a negative. It's like kind of an exclusionary update where it's more so penalizing companies that aren't providing helpful information. And she's given examples of companies that say do like misleading affiliate links or like almost like dark patterns, bad UX, shallow content. So it's like in those cases, like, yes, you should be worried if you've got a traffic drop because, I mean, you built like a house of cards essentially. And on a long enough timeline, given Google's incentives to drive traffic to decent, helpful content, like which has been kind of a rolling, it's not a new thing. Like every major update has sort of like pushed in that direction. Like eventually that house of cards was going to tumble anyway.
Yeah, I've been the developer documentation around the latest update. I recommend Googling it for those who haven't looked at it. It's essentially a self-assessment, a lot of open-ended questions to help understand if your content is likely affected. And there's a section called avoid creating search engine first content. And I love that they phrased it like this because I think a lot of people use the term SEO content and essentially like content written for search. And it's like, to me, it's such a misalignment with the purpose of SEO, which is a distribution channel. And I know we've talked about that and harped on that quite often. But the questions are really interesting. It's like, is the content primarily made to attract visits from search engines? Maybe that's a factor. Like we want to attract visits and traffic for like qualified traffic and qualified leads and conversions, which is why we measure that. But the second question, are you producing a lot of content on many different topics in hopes that some of it might perform well? And what this tells me is that topic clustering and prioritizing, grouping by topics that you have an authority to talk about and that relate to your product and relate to your audience is really important. And I think we've seen a lot of people, both clients and just other folks, it's just like that post and pray strategy that people are still doing. Like this term has volume. There's like 20,000 search volume. We should have a post on it. Those are the types of content that we're seeing not rank well anymore. And that's okay. Going back to what we said initially, it's like if you're losing traffic on unrelated search terms that wouldn't drive conversions, like that's not a loss, in my opinion.
Google's looking for visible signals of expertise. So visible signals could be, I guess, the author byline. I'm not sure how that stacks into rankings, but I would imagine it does if you, as an author, are looked at as an entity. And like, I don't know how much like social media or like what you speak about there, your followership there. But like, if you can say this person's an expert on topic X and Y, but not on Z, then you can devalue what they read on Z potentially. And then there's obviously links. Links are like a trust factor. It's like if high domain rating, if authoritative websites are linking to you, but they're just like identifying these signals as inputs that they can use as sort of a proxy for trust to deliver higher value for those results on the output.
Yeah, bylines are a really important factor. There's a whole section on this, like the who, how, and why, and who created the content. One of the inputs is like, do the pages carry a byline where one might be expected? And I've been telling teams for years, like, don't write the omniscient team as your byline. Like, not only is that create like a really disjointed reader experience where you're like not really sure who's behind the content, but clearly now it's an input that Google's using to understand the expertise and the authority behind each of these topics.
One thing that I think is a little bit misleading, or maybe people misunderstand, is your point on the SEO content thing. So how was that phrased? It was content created just for search or something like that, or search first?
Avoid creating search engine first content.
Yeah, so I think some people read that and they collate two different things in their mind, which is like what you write about and how you write about it. So a lot of people I know would read that and say like, okay, keywords are out, like just, write about like maybe customer pain points, or like we're going to do thought leadership. But to me, and I saw a tweet about this, I can't for the life of me remember who said it, but they're like, keywords are literally consumer research. Like
it's psychology.
It's quantifying what language people use, what they want, what they care about, and to ignore that is foolish from a strategic perspective. Like I actually remember product naming decisions at HubSpot. Like we had a couple products, and I don't think I can go into details here, but they were named these really esoteric things, sort of category creation type terms. And then we realized like the mainstream term got 10,000 searches a month. So we're like, hey, let's just call the software what it is, because this is what people are searching for. But then like that doesn't necessitate that you just regurgitate the top 10 search results and create the median of the keyword density of all of those posts, which is what ClearScope and Surfer kind of give you. It doesn't mean that you have to create the median, mediocre middle when it comes to the creation part.
Google.
I was thinking a lot of. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say Google should not be a resource for producing the content. It should be a resource for ideating and understanding search behavior and then distributing. That's my belief. Go ahead, Dave.
I was working on a client's content roadmap this morning, and they're a very established brand that's been around for many decades, and they had not done any content in this particular industry for this product. And as I was doing keyword research and SERP analysis, or like analyzing the search results for some of these keywords, it was just like, what is X? What is X? On like all the top 10 search results. And I'm like, oh my God. And they're all very established brands as well. I'm like, we talked about this maybe a year ago of the perverse nature of SEO and skyscraper content, where you just look at what's ranking, you just do the same thing and hope that that's what gets you to rank, because that's quote search intent. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to recommend like different angling, because this client has a high enough domain rating and high enough website authority where they can do the optimization for that keyword. Like it's very relevant to them, but they should have something unique to say, or a new angle, and they'll still be able to rank. At least that's my hypothesis, because of the website authority. And a part of me wonders about the second order consequences of, if this client ranks in the top 3, would that then change the way that the search results look? Because people are going to view them as a competitor and then copy the way that they're angling their content. I want to do it because it's like the double eat thing. Like you want it to come from firsthand experience and expertise and all that. But there's also like, I'm also thinking about the long-term impact of how that might change the search results, and like the competitive nature of how one must write in order to rank for this keyword.
That's
the format question's so interesting. Yeah, I had a random shower thought the other day, which I think it was based on Tommy Walker posted some snarky thing about, if B2B writers wrote other topics, and it was something about how to change a light bulb. And it was, some statistic to start the introduction, some little hook. And then it was like, but first, what is a light bulb? Why light bulbs are beneficial, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's funny, but I don't know.
tools to
I'm of
change
two
your light bulb.
minds. So I'm of two minds because, Google is using like absolutely massive amounts of data to suggest that this is what the searcher is looking for. Granted, that could be some snowball effect of people looking at competitors and creating some Frankenstein's monster where it's like everybody converged on this messy middle of what is blank, X benefits of blank, etc. So I kind of, one side of my mind looks at that as the table stakes that I must include in order to say this is a comprehensive piece about this topic. And then I think about what information gain, what angles I can add to stand out. The other side of me is thinking like, if Google wants to deliver the best, most useful content, what if I just fucking skipped that if it wasn't useful and I just gave the most tactical, short form, like very like pointed thing on a topic? Would that work too? And I'm thinking about testing that out on my personal blog or maybe on the Omniscient blog. I think for how-to content, that could be specifically relevant. I mean, I know it's the case, right, with these executive summaries and like the TLDRs. Those are very effective in terms of like readability once you get on page, and it seems like they help rankings too.
I
don't know.
do, as a former writer, boots on the ground, producing like from briefs and keywords, I do wonder how different the the SERP landscape would be if for the last 5 to 10 years there were actual experts producing a lot of this content. I was not an expert when I was at HubSpot. Now I had my own business that I had sold, and I had a lot of experience with certain things I was writing about, but it did feel kind of silly for me to write on things that I didn't have experience in or have a direct line to someone who did have experience in. Toward the end of my time there, I did try to change the nature of the content toward more of how we do XYZ. Alex, you were part of that project. And at Omniscient, we've worked incredibly hard to have direct lines to client SMEs and other experts across the industry so that it's not just a regurgitation, but the basic, like what is benefits of X ways to do this, best practices, tooling. Sure, answer questions quickly, give the people what they want. But I also wonder if it's changed. I'm getting like really deep now, but I'm wondering if it changed the way people think about things and learn new information and process information, because like David said, it's kind of this like cycle of like Google picked up on data because of how people search, but people search because of how Google has presented the data. So it's become this cycle. And I do think that's why like the newest, biggest updates with like the perspectives tab, surfacing TikTok and Reddit results, like I do think that's Google's, and they've said this, Google's attempt to differentiate a lot of the results and provide more like expert opinion, expert answers to some of these queries.
There's a lot there.
A lot there.
The interaction between Google and the user, I've written about that before using terms from evolutionary biology. This is like fish area runaway. So it's like in a mating scenario, a certain trait gets like selected for, and through generations, that trait becomes so overemphasized and absurd that it becomes a survival threat. So it's basically like we as SEOs are trying to constantly like swim upstream. We're constantly trying to like one up the competition. So then we end up with these behemoth monster posts that are just 7,000 words, 2,000 CRO tips that ends up being actually like anti-useful to the user.
Mm-hmm. Well, even like, we know we've been experimenting a lot with using Bard and ChatGPT to create different components of our briefs, always with the human touch, but we've just been experimenting with different prompts. And in the prompt I've been doing for like starter outlines, when it provides like the H3s, like let's just say X ways to market your business or something like that, and it gives you the ways, right? Because that's what other folks have written about. It's like, why not just create that list yourself with your own experience? It's like, do we really need to optimize that much to really meet all of those H3s and H4s? And that's just feeding into that like regurgitated content. Like that's an opportunity to still use that H2 because that's part of optimizing and distributing. But like David said, within each of those optimized headers, like why not take it a different direction? And still use the optimization tools that we have, but like the meat of the sandwich per se, like tackle it a little bit differently and maybe change things up on the SERPs.
Yeah, like does tip number 1 of every how-to listicle in B2B need to say,
your audience.
understand your audience?
Yes.
Does it need to have that to rank? Like, that's the big question.
Actually, don't know your audience. They need to be complete
talk to your
strangers
users.
to you.
I love tips like that. It's like, because they never tell you how. They're just like, you
Right.
need to understand your audience. It's important to understand your audience because blah, blah, blah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Your experts thing was interesting because I was in a conversation earlier this week. I was kind of in a nihilistic spiral, you could say. And this was regarding LinkedIn and like kind of the content ecosystem that we're playing in which we kind of decided to take a step back and alter our approach just a smidge. But, it was related to Kay as well, your mentor, David. And he had posted on Twitter, now X, about how it kind of feels like a ghost town. He's not angry at Twitter. It just doesn't feel like the same ecosystem. There's not as much fun conversation going on. But he followed up with a tweet. He's like, well, the other networks suck too. Like, Instagram's not a social place. It's really just like a glamour shot and meme sharing place. LinkedIn is horrible. It's a fucked up, just like echo chamber of thought leaders. Facebook has been dead for years. And he had no alternatives. And man, it got me down this spiral where I was like, I felt the same thing. I think some newsletters are interesting. I really enjoy some podcasts. I enjoy producing our podcast. But really, where do you go to find good content? And when I was in the beginning of my career, I remember reading blogs like Ryan Holiday's. Ryan Holiday did not write for SEO. Maybe he does now. But he would write these little, they were almost diary posts. He had been working with Dove Charney at American Apparel, which was just this super controversial role. And he was 23 years old or something. And he would write about his lessons from the field, political learnings. And it was fucking fascinating. And I don't know about y'all, but I came up in startups, so I would read all these blogs from startup founders and VCs, and they were personal diary. They weren't. Now we have these whole economies of A16Z. They've got a whole media team of writers and podcasters doing the work for the VCs. We're not actually getting the insights from the source. You know what I mean? So I was kind of longing for those days when economists would have a blogspot.com blog and they just have a little blog roll on the side with their friends and collaborators, and you could just find shit that way.
Yeah. It's there's so much content, but none of it's really saying anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and there's no incentive to create that content. Sorry, David.
I used to read CXL, Buffer used to have a really good blog, I think. Groove, which I saw Alex at Groove is he's doing a whole full transparency, opening up the P&Ls and everything, which is, I guess, trying to revamp that approach. But yeah, there aren't a lot of people that I follow that do that right now. There are some newsletters. But yeah, I just go on LinkedIn and Twitter because it's professional. But I don't really do anything on those platforms anymore. I mean, I guess related to the whole cutting back thing, we were posting every weekday on LinkedIn, and I'd say we had a pretty good streak. And recently, I'm glad you're the one who brought this up, Alex. I was like, why the hell am I doing this? I'm not feeling inspired. I don't really know what to post. I'm kind of getting lazy with it. And sure, I got some engagement, I got some followers, but I would joke to people if I didn't need to do LinkedIn for business, I wouldn't be doing it. And that probably should have been a signal to me that I probably shouldn't be doing it. So we cut down to 3 times a week now, and it's time back where I don't need to spend an hour, 30 minutes or an hour writing this post. There's no streak I'm trying to maintain, and I just feel I have more time back. I don't know, I'm the type where if I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it, and then I have the anxiety if I don't do it, which is not healthy. But it got me thinking about okay, if that was sort of working but not really, what's the balance of doing enough where it's sustainable and there's time to get inspired versus trying to post every single day. That was pretty tiring.
Yeah, it's a broader thing that I've been thinking about, which is effectiveness versus efficiency. We were highly efficient. We had a checklist of sorts. We would write about this topic and we would do 5 days a week. Effectiveness often feels uncomfortable because it's you could literally sit around doing nothing all day and have a 5-minute phone call that's worth every other minute of your day, And it feels like you're not working. It feels like you're wasting time. But the rest of that time that you sat in silence was actually preparing for that one moment or that one decision that actually mattered. So I think at a high level, it was asking ourselves, what the hell is the purpose of this? Like, are we accomplishing the purpose? Is what we're doing actually going to get us to our goal? And what is our goal? Our goal is to get clients and to grow our clients.
Yeah.
Posting every day might do that. It might not. But what it was doing was tiring us out, taking us away from potentially more interesting sales activities, for more interesting client work, for more interesting innovation. And I think that it was optimizing more for building an audience on that platform than it was for driving high propensity deals. There were much easier ways to do that. There were ways that we could spend like a fraction of the time, a fifth of the time on LinkedIn and actually drive deals, as opposed to trying to trigger engagement with hooks and link in the comments. And
it's the wrong game.
We were playing the wrong game.
I don't even want an audience. Like, I don't care about that.
I wasn't as active as you guys. Like, I know I said I would, and every day I'd sit down and I'm like, I don't have anything to say. And like, I feel fake as fuck. Just like reposting stuff on there. And it's just noise. And I honestly, I mean, nobody has something new to say every day, right? Like in any platform. And people do, because consistency helps drive audiences and all that shit. But like, it's getting to the place where it's feeling like really annoying and really heavy to get on there, because it's like, I don't either believe half of what these people are saying. I don't trust that they've actually put the time in to build something thoughtful, which I think is irresponsible. And I just don't feel like it's actually a valuable place to be. And it like you said, Alex, is like, where do you go? Like, where do you go to like connect with people and like read actually valuable things and learn from new people? I think the in-person element is more important than ever. I know all of us have been working really hard to stay connected locally and do networking events that may or may not result in sales. I think it's also really good for your soul. But going back to that efficiency versus effectiveness thing, I actually have a theory that some of the most effective things are not very efficient.
I think
or
so too.
Like it takes a while to build efficiency, and maybe there's opportunities to like have certain automations or efficient practices. But like the minute you automate or make something so efficient that you don't really need to put any thought into it, I think that's when it loses its effectiveness. Now this depends, right? Like if it's a matter of scheduling ahead posts, that's fine. But like sales activity, connecting with clients, like I don't really want to make that stuff too efficient. Like I feel like it kind of loses its flavor at that point. I don't know if those two can really go hand in hand.
I forgot who I heard this from a while back, but someone was like, some of the most meaningful and soulful things in life are the most inefficient things. Like jazz is very inefficient. Like amazing food takes a lot of time to cook. And you just reminded me of that phrase of, you know, not everything. This is really key for me, because I tend to be like, how do I be efficient and productive? Which I've kind of backed out of that a bit over the years, because I realized that's not the most important thing. But even in business, maybe that's not the most important thing to be optimizing for either. Like a lot of folks are starting to go more into like in-person things, and I think that's where people want to be. And like that connection, even though it's not efficient, it's probably most effective and probably makes us happier as humans.
I saw the most fascinating Twitter post about jazz. Somebody was like, jazz is horrible. You know, they had a shitty take about jazz. They hated it. Oh, wow. And then, dude, this guy quote tweeted it, and it was the most grandiose explanation. They basically explained that jazz was the answer to the death of God in modern society and the restructuring of the godlike form. The replacement was in the human individual. So it used to be this hierarchical nature of like composer to composition to players, and then now it's like the players enact all of it. It was crazy. Like I was like, that is crazy. I was watching La La Land. Yes, it's not boring. Well, the efficiency effectiveness thing. Maybe I'm using the wrong word for that, but what I was thinking too is like, so there's kind of like this phrase, like the work smarter, not harder thing. And that's kind of what I was getting to, not necessarily efficiency, which could be process and it could be like automations. I think those things can be actually really effective as well, because they can make time for, you know, more interesting problem solving. You know, doing one automation that saves you 10 hours a week actually could be the most effective thing you could do. But more so like productivity. Like sometimes I feel guilty if I'm not working 12 hours in a day or something like that. But I don't think you can have one without the other preceding it. I think like the whole work harder or work smarter, not harder thing is sort of one of those rich person privileged opinions to have, where it's like, yeah, but you worked hard for 25 years so you could find out what working smarter actually means. You know, like before you've worked hard, you don't actually know what the smart things to focus on are. I don't know if that resonates.
Yeah, I mean, my mom has owned her own business for like 25 years and she's still very in the weeds. So it's like in that regard, it's like she loves what she does, but there's not a lot of efficiency and therefore she works for a long time, a lot of the days. She doesn't take a lot of time off. Now she's very passionate about it, but I look at her and I'm like, I could tell you 10 ways to better prioritize what you're doing, like optimize what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera. Now what she's doing is very effective if we want to go back to that like dichotomy, but I agree that there's definitely ways to make things easier, but there are other things that, like, for example, I'm working on this massive project for a client and like, sure, I could delegate it. Sure, I could automate it. But like being in the weeds and working quote unquote harder has actually opened up a lot of doors for me and a lot of like interesting analyses that I don't necessarily want someone else to do. Like I want to be close to that. This isn't like, I wouldn't do this across the board because that's not very effective, but there's ways that like working harder is actually smarter and better in the long run. So I think the key is figuring out which is which and like what deserves like your, like the minutia and what deserves a lot of your time and other things that you can automate and save those 10 hours a week.
I want to propose maybe instead of effective, it's like there are certain things where you could get more leverage where like you can do less but still get the same results. And like your mom doing a lot of those things where you could be automated, like can probably automate and do like still get the exact same result, like outcome.
Yep.
Versus like she's probably working very efficiently in those things. It's just not a lot of leverage. And I think about I saw this Instagram post recently of how ironic it's what you just said, Alex, like how ironic it is that people who are successful give advice to not work as hard. It's like, well, you got there because you worked really hard. And so I have this internal tension of I eventually don't want to work a lot, but I know right now, like,
but that's why we are working a lot. Yeah. Like that wouldn't exist without this.
So it's not like there's no weird naivety. I'm not being naive about the fact that it takes hard work to get there. And like, I hope that y'all will keep me accountable in the future to not be telling people to not work hard. Because I think success requires that.
I don't think it's on purpose, but it almost feels like one of those pushing the ladder down once you've climbed it type things to me. Like it feels, not everybody needs to work hard because not everybody has the same goals and ambition. But like if you do have very high goals and very high ambition, you're not going to get there without working hard. And that's like a Twitter debate that's happened like probably 10 to 20 times. It pops up every 3 to 4 months because somebody wants engagement and they, post some tweet about like, hey, like you're going to have to work 100 hours a week if you want to like, get anywhere. And then there's a whole bunch of people who are like, yeah, but work-life balance and self-care. But there's obviously truth in that. Like if you're in law, if you're in medicine, like, I've dated people in medicine, like they work 100 hours a week and they're doing absolutely insane shit. There's just a necessity in certain fields. Like if you're building a startup, you're going to have to work a lot,
I think it's a pretty interesting, like to me, there's a nuance where it's like, I'm not telling anyone to like kill themselves and work like crazy, but it's more like, for me, I realize when I'm not being productive anymore and I'll just like stop working and be like, I'm not even actually doing anything productive. Like I'm just clicking around and like changing tabs over and over again. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go rest. And then there are some nights where it's like 8 p.m. and I haven't eaten dinner because I'm just like in the zone. And I'm like, I'm going to ride this wave. Like, I'm not going to eat until 10 or something. And I do that. So it's not like this intentional, I'm going to work 80 hours a week. It's like, I think it's pretty healthy where if I do need the time to rest, I will like go take a nap or end work at 7 p.m. or like 6 p.m. or whatever, go for a walk and then like have dinner and just watch TV or something. So, but it's really around the folks who just, I'm going to do my 40 hours a week and hope I get paid a lot of money and like, that's it, like collect a paycheck. That, I guess this sort of relates to something I want to talk about where I've been getting people texting me and they're like, is it just me or is it hard to hire good talent right now? And I'm like, you're not the first person to tell me that. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's related to this, where maybe folks kind of, and I asked, like, do you just have a high standard, like a high bar for who you're trying to hire for? And the person was like, I mean, that's probably a part of it, but I don't think it's unreasonable. And I'm like, maybe it's the talent market. I'm not sure. But it got me thinking a lot about whether there's kind of a shift of, maybe when I was in my early 20s, I think there was a lot more of a culture of like that hustle culture and just like grinding it out. And I feel like maybe there's a point where that was kind of looked down upon, probably during COVID. But I wonder if that's impacting the quality of talent folks are getting.
Tech changed a lot in this timeline. Since I started in tech, like the people who came into tech differed vastly in 2014 and in 2019. Back in 2014, it wasn't like a cool thing. There was no like associate PM rotational programs. Like nothing like that really existed. And then I think it became much more of an industry, right? So there were like it was a bunch of nerds who like read fucking like the Lean Startup and I don't know, maybe Tim Ferriss's blog and like maybe Paul Graham's blog. But those were like, they wanted to build their own startup someday. Like that was kind of the cohort I came up in. So like there was roll up your sleeves and do scrappy stuff and try and you know, you try to maximize your time on the job. And then I think it became much more of an illustrious career option outside of consulting, outside of finance, outside of medicine. And I think a lot of different types of people came in. There was a lot of free money floating around. RSUs were going nuts from 2019 through 2022. And I think that changed the nature of the talent market. But now, like, things are different, and that model no longer works for business leadership. You know, you see even Google's leadership saying, "We believe many people aren't working very hard." Paraphrasing, but they stated that, which is really interesting compared to 2021 mentality.
Yeah, I mean, the talent market is interesting because I mean, we just went through a couple rounds of hiring and we had some really talented people in our pipeline. And I think the fact that we had a pretty lengthy hiring process really helped us have confidence in who we've recently hired, and they're awesome. And I wonder, like, the folks that are texting you or like the general chatter about the talent market, I wonder what their hiring process looks like, because I've seen a lot of stuff on LinkedIn lately that's like, hiring isn't that hard. Just have a couple chats and like a test project that you pay for, and then just pick somebody. Like, it doesn't have to be that hard. And I'm like, it should be hard. Like, it should be difficult. It doesn't need to be a 3-month process with 8,000 interviews, but like, I'm very proud of the process that we built. And I know we had an episode on it recently, and it was by design. I also, like, I just had this conversation with Kaylee and Krista just about like hustle culture and folks kind of playing victim in terms of like their career and thinking that like, don't ask me to do anything after 501 kind of thing. And it's like, I do think that there was a season, I think, for our parents' careers that they were expected to work at all hours, regardless of what job tier they were at or what their salary was. So maybe this is like an overcorrection of some sort. But the thing is like, I expect hard work from our team. I also respect boundaries. Like, have the guts to communicate your boundaries. Like, don't be too scared and feel like you have to work because like a partner is asking you to. Like, stand up for yourself, speak about what you can do and what you can handle, and just like come to the table with honesty and integrity. And then it'll be, in my mind, that's really all that's needed. I think people give up before they even try, or they assume the worst from their employers. And it's like, everyone's just doing their best right now, I think.
Yeah. The process of working hard makes it so you don't have to work as long later, though. It's kind of like we're talking a lot about martial arts now, I feel like. But like when, you learn like a new move in jiu-jitsu or something, the first couple times it feels awkward and you don't get it right. And then really it's through repetition that you generate muscle memory, and it feels smooth as butter and you can just do it without thinking. So like I've spent probably thousands of hours in Google Analytics. I don't know exactly, but now if somebody asks me a business question, even with GA4, it takes me 5 seconds to go find the answer. I've written hundreds and hundreds of blog posts. So like to write a blog post takes significantly less time than when I first started. So it depends where you're at in your journey. But if you're working really, really hard, maybe you're working for a bad boss who's going to burn you out, but maybe it's like you're focusing on the wrong things, and like maybe you need to practice it a couple times so you can spend 2 hours instead of 6 hours. You know where to waste less time, and you know where to focus your time on. Maybe it's just like your own kind of personal trajectory in whatever skill you're building.
Yeah, I maybe it's because I'm a boss now, but I'm really I guess I'm just sensitive to when people like assume their bosses like want them to run ragged. It's like we've very commonly said to the team, like, we work a lot. There's absolutely no expectation that you work a lot. And if you are finding yourself having to work consistently after hours, then there's probably something wrong with the process that we've built, or a communication thing. Like, I need you to tell me those things so we can figure this out. Like, that's not a standing expectation. But just because like we like what we're doing and we're really passionate about it doesn't just blanket apply to the whole team. And I'm very adamant about those boundaries. It's just like, I don't know unless they tell me. So it's just opening those lines of communication.
I've like accidentally slacked people at like 8 or 9 p.m. and then they'll respond. I'm like, wait, why are you online? Like, like you don't have to respond now. Like go take care of your life thing.
Go to sleep.
I guess the part I'm very cautious of is not wanting to impose my work ethic upon others. Mm-hmm. Like when I was trying to get into marketing and tech, I remember my routine when I was living in LA. It was like shitty apartment, getting paid like $10 an hour, and then like paycheck to paycheck. I'd wake up, I'd go to a coffee shop, do some marketing courses or like write a blog, go to work, and then after work I'll go to a coffee shop and like do some like technical SEO audits to get the reps in. Mm-hmm. And like reach out to people and do just free work, and I do that every single day. But I don't think it's fair. I don't know. I don't think it's fair to try to impose that expectation upon others, or like look only for people who have that trait, because I think that's unrealistic, and it'll probably like set me up for disappointment. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, if someone did do that and told me that they were doing that, I'd be like, oh shit, yeah, that's impressive. You're doing what you need to do to progress and learn. So there's a weird balance of like, I'm not gonna only look for that, but if I see it, I'm like, oh, okay, you get bonus points because you are willing to put into work.
You want to nurture that too, and that's one of those things that like early in my career, I was the exact same way. I think maybe if you're like, there's such a thing as like toxic empathy, right? Maybe you see that person and you're like, hey, no, rest more. Like you just do this thing. Don't worry about the rest of those things. That's actually sort of an insult to the person. And, if they're asking for it and they're proactive, like you're best off, like the best value you can give them is to nurture that. Like that's what I wanted early in my career, is to like have that shot.
Me and Lisa, my partner, like we learned that about each other, where I'm working. She's like, you should take a break. I'm like, but I like what I'm doing. Like, I want to be doing this. And every now and then I see her working late. I'm like, do you need a break? She's like, nope, I'm good. I'm like, okay, cool. Can I bring you dinner or something? I don't know. It's interesting that we both like being in that mode, but we're very aware, and like we try to remind each other you don't have to be. But it's like, nope, I'm good. Just let me do my thing. We've been interviewing for a marketing intern, and one of them had asked about like what I got from my internships, and I was just like, I learned what I didn't know, and then I went and learned that. Like that's ideally what you get out of work if you're trying to get better. Like you figure out what your blind spots are and you go try to improve that, versus just accepting those blind spots. I'm going on a ramble now. I have a lot of feelings about like professional and career development and what it takes.
I can tie you back. You mentioned leverage before, and that's one of those things that without having done the exploration and usually a lot of work, you don't really know what leverage points you uniquely have. And those are eventually going to be the things that define your career. So now, I mean, I'm still learning more about like what I'm uniquely good at, and like trying to focus more of my time on those activities, and, trying to delegate, or even just ignore the other things that I'm maybe like mediocre at and I'm probably never going to be top 1%. For example, I was doing all these data science courses and actually learning AI pretty early on. I took a Udacity course, Python for like AI programming, and I built like a classifier model, and it was horrible. Like it was like 50% accurate. It took me forever. So I was like, I'm probably not going to be top 1% in this. But then there's certain areas that I think I am very good at, and it's like, you know, building connections, networking, like finding leverage among like my network, writing. Like there's certain things where I'm like, I should be spending much more time on that. But like I didn't know that when I was in college. I had no idea.
Yeah, you'd never know unless you tried.
Did you both also do this thing? Like every year I was like, I'm going to write a blog post a week, and I'm going to take a JavaScript course, and I'm going to learn HTML, and I'm going to learn data science. And I had all these things I wanted to learn. And at some point I was like, you know, I've had these items on my to-do / goals list for 3 years and I haven't done it. Maybe I just won't do it. I don't know. Did y'all run into that? Because I think we're all pretty driven.
Yeah, there was quite a long list of things I felt like I should want to do, and I thought with enough like attempts and things that it would click for me. And I think that's one thing I've learned in my later 20s is like, yes, there's always things that you have to do. Like that's the difference between motivation and discipline. But there's also like a small component of things that like if you really don't want to do them, that's not going to go away, and you're never going to have that same level of interest or passion if you're doing things that you feel like you should do. It sounds like you actually wanted to learn Python for whatever reason. It sounds like you actually wanted to explore that, and then you decided maybe it wasn't worth your time. But there are things that I've had that I'm like, I don't really want to do this. I just feel like I should. And I feel like it would like look cool, or it would make me more money or whatever, or everyone else is doing it and it would make me a bad marketer if I didn't. And that's the, I think the wisdom that you learn when you get older and you do enough and you find your strengths, like Alex said, and you find the things that you're both interested in and really good at. And that's kind of like the perfect mix.